Okay, so good morning, everyone. Welcome to a cold and rainy Raincouver day. It's going to do this a lot in the next few months, so we may as well get used to it. I see a number of people have stayed home because they didn't want to get wet. That's not a good reason not to come in. If you're not feeling well, don't come into school. But if you're just feeling like you don't want to get wet, that's not an excuse, so you should be here. But anyway. Daniel's here. Good morning, Daniel. And Claire's here. Good morning to you. And Vicky is here. Good morning, Vicky. And Mike is here as well. Good morning, Mike. Yesterday we talked about, we finished watching Mean Girls, right? And so I had you answer all of these questions. About the movie. What did you think? Good movie? So there's some iconic moments. Some of those moments have even become memes. It's a classic film, and even and Amy's here too. Good morning, Amy. Even I like it, and I mean I'm not the target audience for that film. I think we could probably agree, but I like it too. I've seen it probably 5 times now at least in these classes, and so a few times more, and I should be able to recite the entire film from memory, but that's okay. So why did we watch this film? Or maybe what kinds of things do we want to remember about it? So some of the main takeaways, things I would like you to remember. Number one is that we're all socialized, right? We have learned societal norms and values and beliefs. And so that's happened to us in our real lives, right? We've all lived in society and absorbed beliefs and values and so on. And we kind of see that happening in Mean Girls, right? Where Katie is dropped into this high school society that she has no experience in, and she has to kind of figure it out, right? She has to learn, what things are good and bad, what things are cool and not cool, how she should behave, how she should dress, who her friends are and who are not her friends. All of these things she has to kind of learn on the fly, right? And, I think she does kind of what all of us do as we're being socialized. We try to figure things out, we make some mistakes, sometimes we act the wrong way, and we eventually get there, right? We eventually figure out how society works, how to behave, what appropriate behaviors are. One of the other things I want you to remember here is that we're often socialized without our knowledge or consent. And so I'm trying to say here that we absorb social messages sometimes without knowing them. And then they start to influence our behavior behind the scenes. And so I kind of used this metaphor or analogy about like a computer virus, right? And so computer viruses find their way into your computer. You don't really know where they came from most of the time. You don't know what they're doing. You don't even know that they're running. They're just kind of operating in the background, right? And social messages are very much like that, except for the fact that you don't want computer viruses. You don't want malware in your computer. But for social messages, depending on what the social message is, some of them are good, but they, like a computer virus, they kind of operate in the background, and sometimes we're not quite aware that we know them. And we see that happening in the film with Katie, right? Because she is socialized by Regina, and so she starts, becoming Regina in a way, right? She starts acting like her and dressing like her and interacting with other people like her, even though she probably doesn't even want to do that, right? Because she's trying to destroy Regina at the same time. But Regina is such a powerful agent of socialization, Katie accidentally becomes socialized by her anyway, right? She accidentally starts to act and dress and behave like Regina because, again, Regina is such an influential person, right? One of the other things I'd like you to remember about this film is that many social rules are arbitrary, but they still have powerful consequences, right? So people who who obey the rules will be rewarded. People who disobey or break the rules may be punished, right? And we see that very clearly with Regina when she wears sweatpants on Monday. The rule is sweatpants only on Friday, right? And so it's clearly a made-up rule, right? It's kind of ridiculous, right? But still, the other members of the group enforce that rule, and Regina is punished for it, even though she's the one who made the rule probably in the first place. And so social rules are very much like that, right? Basically, all social rules are made up, right? They are only true because we all agree them to be true, right? When we, pre-COVID, often when we meet people, we shake their hand, right? That's our custom. We don't go like, blah, right? We don't do that. Why not? Well, because we've all kind of agreed that blah is weird and a handshake is a much, that's the proper way to greet someone. We could greet someone like this, but we've just agreed not to, right? We've agreed to shake each other's hands and say, oh, nice to meet you, right? And so there's no reason why we have to do that. It's an arbitrary rule. But again, if you start greeting people like, blah, people are going to punish you for it, right? They're going to look at you like, that's kind of weird, or why are you doing that? Or, I can't even with you, right? They're going to have a reaction, right? So social rules are arbitrary. They're made up, but they have real consequences for people if they break them, even if they're a little ridiculous. Most societies have a social hierarchy, right? An organizational system where people are sorted out according to authority or power or status or prestige. And the high school has that, right? The North Shore High School in the movie has that. And I think what's interesting is that we all very intuitively recognize that that exists, right? So I didn't even have to show you that movie. But if I told you who's the most popular, or who's the more popular group in high school, the Asian nerds or the varsity jocks? Yeah, you all kind of intuitively know that the jocks are higher up in the social organization. So not only does that organization exist, but we kind of already know it, right? We know how it works. And the high school kids, the kids in North Shore High, they know how it works too, right? They know where their place in the social order is pretty intuitively, and they respect it, right? Is there any reason why anyone has to, treat the plastics as royalty? Are there any police walking around the halls making sure that people treat the plastics the right way? No. Everyone just kind of has been socialized into understanding that these girls are at the top and you don't mess with these girls, right? And you bow down to them and respect them. And people just kind of do it, right? Again, there's no reason why there is a bit of a reason, but we can talk about it later. But the kids behave that way because they've been socialized that way. And we've kind of been socialized that way too because we very easily understand the social hierarchy of that school, right? It doesn't really need to be explained to us. And so the social group that we belong to, the social group that we belong to plays a role in our position within that hierarchy. So if you walked into that school, if you walked into North Shore High School, your gender, your sexuality, your race or ethnicity, your intelligence, and sort of your confidence or physical attractiveness or sense of style, all of those things would influence where you fit into the social hierarchy, right? So very, attractive, fashionable girls who are very confident might wind up finding themselves in the plastics, right? And so they'll be at the top. And, if you are Asian and really smart, but maybe socially awkward, you may find yourself in the Asian nerds, and you may find yourself kind of in the bottom part of the social order, right? And so maybe not, but again, these sort of social groups that you belong to kind of will influence where you sit in that social hierarchy, at least in this school anyway. And again, our position in the hierarchy determines how people in society treat us, right? And so I think we saw in the movie very clearly that people treated the plastics different than members of the other social groups, right? So nobody crossed the plastics, everybody respected them and, you know, looked up to them. And, you know, like what did that one girl say at the beginning of the movie? Regina George punched me in the face once. It was awesome. That's a weird thing to say, isn't it? But it shows you how much people kind of idolize the plastics, is that one of them can punch you in the face and somehow that is awesome, right? So again, the social group you belong to will influence how society treats you, right? And we definitely see that in the movie. Okay, so to move on, or maybe just to tie up this socialization thing, the other thing I want to remind you of is that the social group that you belong to does influence how you see the world, right? And so in the real world here, we grow up as young men or young women. We grow up as members of a certain race or ethnic group. We grow up in a certain country or community where you know, our racial or ethnic group might be kind of in charge, or they might not be. We grow up in a certain religion. We grow up as immigrants to a country or as sort of citizens of a country, and all of those things will, we grow up as members of certain religions. All of those things will influence our socialization, and they will color our perception of the world around us, okay? And so, and the other thing I'll mention too is that we will all be socialized by the society we live in. We will all absorb social ideas of that society. And sometimes we'll absorb them whether we like them or not, right? And so again, just like Katie with Regina, she starts to absorb social messages from Regina and she starts to act on them, even though she doesn't really like Regina in the first place, right? Because as I say, she's trying to destroy her, but she gets socialized by her anyway. And we'll see that coming up where people living in a society might absorb social messages and act on them, even though those social messages are actually bad for them. They actually disadvantage them. And we'll see that a number of times. And we'll give it a fancy name, but I'll wait till later. Yeah, and so this is kind of maybe the last thing I'll say about socialization is that, again, I'm trying to point out here that the social group that you belong to and the way that you've been socialized has an effect on how you, your experience within society. And so, you know, are we all unique individuals? Absolutely, right? But also, the social groups we belong to are race, ethnicity, gender, religion, immigration status, sexuality. All of those things will influence the way that society treats us and the way that we experience society, okay? So again, we're all unique, but the social groups we belong to is also important, particularly for this class, okay? All right, so I said that. Let's move on to oppression and power. And so if I asked you what oppression means, just off the top of your head, what would you tell me? Not depression, oppression.
Someone like use their power to oppress other.
Yeah. So power is used to oppress other people or other groups. What else would you say?
Some sort of like being bullied.
Okay, something maybe about being bullying. So bullying and oppression seem to be synonymous or overlapping in some way.
Yeah.
Okay. What else would you say? Actually, it's pretty good for a start. Let's leave it there for a moment. Okay. Oh yeah, and Gabrielle here says unequal rights. Yeah, oppression does have to do with with some people having rights that others don't. That is definitely true. Okay. Let me show you this, which we should probably remember at this point. So this is the map of the high school cafeteria that Janice draws for Katie, right? And so she draws out all of these, she names all of these different social groups. She indicates where they all sit. Is the greatest people you will ever meet on there? Maybe not. Okay. Anyway, so this is the map that Katie is given, right, by Janice. And so one of the things I want to introduce to you now that will come up over and over again is this concept of binary opposites, okay? So what does binary mean? Well, yeah, so computer language is called binary because there's only two characters, right? There's zeros and ones, that's all it is. So things that are binary are 2, right? Bi is 2. So things that are binary have 2, and what are opposites? Yeah, well, two things that are kind of not the same, right? So opposites are opposing things. Binary means there's 2. And so society often, social groups are often defined by binary opposites. This is kind of a lazy way to do things, but often humans are very good at intuitively understanding things that are opposite. And so often we define things this way, right? So think of a binary opposite. Hot or cold? Black or white? Up or down? Cool, not cool? Pretty or ugly? Wet or dry? What else?
Big and small.
What?
Big and small.
Big and small. What else? Smart or dumb. Clean and dirty. Right? We very intuitively, us human beings, we very intuitively organize things like this, right? Is it this or that, right? Is it up or down, black or white, clean or dirty, smart or dumb? That's a very intuitive way to organize things. And so often social groups are kind of created based on these binary oppositions. And this is kind of we'll see this happen in a number of ways, but often for social groups, we define ourselves not only by the group we're in, but also by its opposite, right? So I am, for instance, I'm a man, right? You should all be nodding your heads. Okay, I am a man. And so part of the definition of me being a man, right, and all the things that come with being a man, is the fact that I am not a woman, right? So men are like this, women are like this. I know this is an oversimplification and it's not true, but just stick with me for a minute. Men are like this, women are like this, and so I'm a man, so I'm supposed to be like this, and at the same time, I am not those things. Make sense? Okay, so we define ourselves based on what we are, but also on what we're not, right? So here in Canada, we like to define ourselves as Canadians, and so what are Canadians like? We're nice. We're what?
Hockey.
We like hockey. What else do we like? We like skateboarding. Some of us do. What?
Nature.
There's lots of, we've got lots of nature in our country. There's lots of trees and bears and things like that. What else? Maple syrup. What else are Canadians like? They like poutine.
Friendly.
They're friendly. They're very polite. They say sorry to everyone for no reason. What's that?
Tomato chips for some reason.
Tomato chips?
Yeah.
So popular in
It's
Canada.
only in Canada.
Like you mean the ketchup ones?
Yeah.
Yeah, the ketchup one.
Oh, the ketchup ones. Yeah, I guess that's a thing. That's a thing that we have, ketchup chips. Come to Canada, we have ketchup chips. Yeah, so we're really polite, right? We apologize to everyone. We apologize to things. If we like trip over a table, we say sorry to the table. It's kind of ridiculous. But this is what this is kind of how we define Canadians. But also, we like to define ourselves by what we're not. What are we not? We're not Americans, right? So Canadians will point out what we are, but we'll also very quickly point out who we're not. We're not like those guys over there, right? So again, people define themselves not only by who they are and what they're supposed to be, but also by what they're not, right? What they kind of reject, right? And so men are, we can dig into this later. I know this is not entirely correct, but men are supposed to be strong because you're not supposed to be, soft and weak like a woman is. And I know that's wrong. I'm just, for now, right? Let's just let it sit for now. We'll dig into it later. I'm just trying to point out this binary opposition. So it's kind of interesting then, because if we look at the high school with all of the groups in it, lots of those groups are organized according to binary oppositions. So if we look at the plastics, for instance, are they popular or not? Popular. What about the desperate wannabes? Popular or not? What about the varsity jocks? Popular or not? Popular. Men or women, boys or girls, right? The jocks are, plastics are girls. The let's see, what about attractive or not attractive? The plastics? Desperate wannabes? Not so much. Asian nerds?
Attractive.
Well, I think you're biased on that one. Not necessarily, maybe, right? But the angry black hotties? They're attractive, right? It says right in the name, they're hotties, right? So a lot of those groups are kind of organized according to binary oppositions. And again, when I sort of fire these things off at you, you're able to very quickly respond at what people are like, right? So again, often society creates binary oppositions like that, right? Are you, man or woman, boy or girl? Are you straight or gay? Are you rich or poor? Are you, religious or not? Are you a citizen or not? So often society creates these binary oppositions, and they exist and they serve to help us organize the way the world works, but they're oversimplifications, and none of them are really true. They're all socially constructed. They're all arbitrary, but we'll get into that later. I just wanted to introduce this idea of binary opposites right here. So in a real society, we have social groups just like the high school does, right? Except our social groups are going to be divided out by race, by social or economic class, by sexuality, by religion, by nationality. And just like in Mean Girls, just like at the high school, those groups are going to have different levels of power, right? So just like the plastics have a lot of social power, they have economic power too, because I think they all come from wealthy families, right? So just like the plastics have a lot of power in society, we'll see that some social groups have more power than others. And so the relationship between these social groups, of one having more power than the other, that's what we're going to call oppression, okay? So this is what we'll say it is. This is what we'll say oppression is. We're going to say that it is a set of policies or practices or social norms or definitions or explanations that function to systematically exploit one social group to the benefit of another social group, okay? And the terms we're going to use going forward are dominant and minoritized, okay? So the dominant group is the group that has power in society. Minoritized groups have less, okay? So in Canadian society, in terms of race, who's the dominant group?
White.
White people, right? Are there people that are not white in Canada? Yes. Do they have some positions of power? Yes. But in terms of society as a whole, who has power? White people do, right? So white people are the dominant group in Canada with regard to race, and people of color or non-white people are in a minoritized group, right? And so the idea behind oppression here, at least how we're talking about it now, is that in Canada we have policies, we have laws, we have ways of doing things, we have social norms, we have social messaging, all of which serve to benefit white people at the expense of non-white people or people of color. Okay, and so this is we'll dig into this a little more when we get to the racism thing, but this is what people are talking about when they talk about systemic racism. So it's not necessarily people being racist, it's the fact that the system that you live in advantages some people and disadvantages others. And so again, we'll get to this a little later. Actually, I think we'll get to it right now. Oh, okay, we will get to it right now. So in this class, this is what we will talk about in terms of oppression. So oppression is a relationship between different groups. So it's not an action, it's not necessarily, in social justice terms, it's not something that one person does, and it's not a particular action, it is a relationship, okay? So again, and if you look at this chart here, this chart would differ depending on where in the world you were, right? So this one is more for like Canada, the US, and Europe, right? If I went to China, for instance, would the dominant group be white people? No. What's the dominant group in China? Chinese people, right? So white people are not in a dominant group there. So this chart changes depending on where in the world that you go. But for the West here, this is kind of what it is. So the relationship between white people and people of color is one of oppression, right? White people are benefited in our society. People of color are disadvantaged. And so that relationship is called racism. And as I'll get to in a minute, nobody has to do anything. This is the tricky part about oppression that sometimes people struggle with, particularly in media and social media. When you're dealing with a systemic oppression, whether it's racism or sexism or whatever, nobody necessarily has to do anything, right? Nobody has to actually be racist in order for certain people to benefit, okay? I might be jumping ahead, but since we're talking, let me give you a quick example. If we played Monopoly, okay? So Sam and I are going to play Monopoly. You guys have all at least seen Monopoly? Who's played it? Who has seen it but not played it? Okay. So it's a board game. You go around the board, you roll dice, you buy properties, and then when somebody lands on your square, you get to charge them rent and make money. Okay? This is very capitalistic. So let's say Sam and I are going to play Monopoly, okay? But at the beginning of the game, Sam and I are going to start out with some money, okay? So I'm going to start out with $1,000. Sam's going to start out with $3,000, okay? And we're going to take turns. I'm going to roll the dice, and I'm going to move my little token around the board. The same thing with Sam. He's going to roll the dice and move his token around the board. But I'm only going to get to roll one dice. Sam's going to get to roll two. So Sam can go around the board more often than I can. And in Monopoly, that's important because every time you go around the board, you get $200 more just for going around the board. So you make money for circling the board in addition to all the other things you can do. So Sam and I are both going to play by the rules of Monopoly. We're going to follow the rules. Both Sam and I are going to do our best to win the game, right? We're going to play with all the skill that we can. Who do you think is going to win? Sam is probably going to win this game, right? He started out with more money than I have, so he can buy more properties earlier. And what? Yeah, and he has more chances to do so, and he's going to make more money because he's going to circle the board faster than me because he has an extra dice. He can go more spaces. So is Sam cheating? No. Is he being a jerk? No. He's just playing the game according to the rules with what's given to him, right? And so ultimately, I am disadvantaged in this game of Monopoly. and I'm probably not going to win. But that's not really my fault, and it's not really Sam's fault either, right? So this is kind of how systemic oppressions work, is that the game is set up to benefit one group of people and to disadvantage another. And so I can play, as hard as I can, but it's going to be a lot more difficult for me to win. And Sam can play as hard as he can too, or maybe he can, not pay too much attention, but he's probably going to do better than I am because he has the advantage. And so he doesn't necessarily have to be a jerk about it. He doesn't need to cheat. He doesn't need to, make insulting comments to me across the board while we're playing. None of that has to happen, right? He's probably going to do better than me just because he has advantages, right? And so that's kind of how these systemic oppressions work. Nobody has to do anything wrong. Nobody has to be a jerk. Nobody has to cheat. But some people have more advantages than others. And in this case, people who are white have more advantages. People who are in the owning class, right? So people who have money and wealth and investments and things like that. In terms of sex, people who are men, right? And you'll see I have cis men there. We'll talk about that when we get to sexism. People who are men, people who are heterosexual are in the dominant group, and they have advantages over people who are in the minoritized group. In the West, Christians, people who are broadly Christian, have advantages over people who are of other religions. If you are able-bodied, and so if you don't have any significant physical or mental or developmental disabilities, then you have advantages that other people don't have. If you are a citizen, or if at least people perceive you to be a citizen, that's an advantage to you. And there's a colonialism thing too here, which we may talk about a little bit. We've already talked about it a bit. So all of these things are relationships, right? And so there are ways in which some people are advantaged and some people are disadvantaged. And so again, just like the game of Monopoly, oppression occurs when one group's prejudice or one group's advantages are backed up by legal authority and historical and social and institutional power. And we'll talk about those a little bit more. But in the sort of metaphor I'm using here, Sam's advantage in the game is backed up by the rules, right? So in this case, let's say the rules allow Sam to have 2 dice and me just 1. And it allows Sam to start with more money than me. So again, he doesn't have to cheat. He's playing by the rules, but I'm going to be disadvantaged as a result, right? And so, and in this case, it doesn't even have to be Sam's fault, right? Sam is just going to play the game as best he can with what he's been given, right? But he's probably going to do better than me. Yeah, so, and this is different from prejudice and discrimination, but we'll get to that very, very shortly, because we need to sort out stereotype and prejudice and discrimination. And so to do that, what I'm going to ask you to do is to read a little article that I have. And so I've put it into Microsoft Teams under Files. And so you'll see there's 2 files there. There's one of the files says prejudice and discrimination, and I think that's the article. And then the other one is the questions that I would like to ask you. And so as you'll see, there's 7 questions that I would like you to sort of pull out of that reading. And so maybe what I'll do is I will give you, I'm going to put 20 minutes on the clock, and then we'll see where we are at the end of 20 minutes, okay? We'll probably take a break at that point, but I'll put 20 minutes on the clock, and I'll let you start reading, okay? Whoops. I'll let you start reading. All right, so yeah, so the files are in Microsoft Teams under Files, Prejudice and Discrimination. Read the article, and then there's 7 questions there to answer. Yeah, okay, let's do that. Okay, good people. I have a feeling that we're probably going to need a little more time with this.
Is it a research paper?
I'm not really sure what it is. It's not very well written, unfortunately,
It's so
but
hard to read.
it is a little tricky to read. Some of it, sometimes it's because of the language, sometimes because, again, it's just not very well written. But there is some important stuff that I would like to pull out, and so we'll untangle it a little bit. Again, it's not a perfect thing, but it's good enough for our purposes. But we'll probably need a little more time. But for now, why don't we take a 10-minute break, relax a little bit, then we'll come back, we'll finish this up, and then we'll talk about the questions, okay? So, I think we probably need just a few more minutes with this. How many more minutes do you think? Give me some feedback here. Just continue it? What do you mean? Huh? Oh, like just give you like 20 minutes? How about you can go together? So Mike says 5 minutes, Amy says 5 minutes. Okay, I'm going to give 7 more minutes and then we'll talk, okay? Okay. Just to give everybody a chance to prepare some deep, intriguing answers that I will be blown away with. Right? Okay. Okay. Time's up, people. Let's try and pull this apart, okay? So, like I mentioned, this is not the best written article that I've ever seen, and I apologize to you for that. But there are some things in here that are useful to talk about, and so I think it's worth the trouble of kind of stumbling through it. What's a stereotype? And online people, you can type in your answers here too, and I'll throw them up on the board as they come through. Anna.
Attitude towards a person or a group on the basis of their physical characteristics.
Okay, so an attitude toward a person or a group based on their physical characteristics. Okay, that's good, that's part of it. What else? What else can we say about stereotypes? Either other things you might have said or other things they may say in the article.
They're said often that they've become something that old people believe that it's true.
Right, so it's something that often lots of people believe to be true, right? So there are lots of common stereotypes floating around out there, right? That we either that we believe or that we're at least aware of, right? So there's some popular stereotypes. What else? What else can we say about stereotypes? Or is that all we can say about them?
That they're not always true.
Right? They're not always true. In many cases, they are not true. Sometimes they have a grain of truth to them, or they're true from a certain perspective, or there is some reason why the stereotype is the way it is. But of course, they're not always true for sure. What are the different types of stereotypes? Individual stereotypes. So what do those mean, or what are those? Your attitude toward individual people. Okay, so what can we give you an example of that? What's an example? What's that? Attractiveness, yeah. So there's lots and lots of studies out there that have shown that people who society finds attractive are often perceived to have good characteristics, right? They're smart, or they're funny, or they're nice, or they're competent, right? So we have a stereotype. We assume that when people are attractive on the outside, we also assume that they are attractive on the inside, right? That they're smart and good and competent and caring, intelligent people, right? Which is sometimes the case, and sometimes maybe not so much, right? Okay, another type of stereotype. Okay, what's a group stereotype? Right, so if we know something about a group of people, then we can make judgments about an individual person, right? So if we go back to the North Shore High School, and we kind of know what the varsity jocks are like, right? They're a bunch of athletic, confident, loud, bro-y kind of, sport football player guys, right? We kind of know what the group is like. So if we say that, James here is a member of the varsity jocks, that means that we can kind of make some guesses about what he's like, right? Because we know what the group is like. Does that necessarily mean that that's exactly what James is like? Not necessarily, but we might apply the stereotype to him, right? We know what varsity jocks are like, so when we learn that James here is a varsity jock, we can make some assumptions about him. We might be right, we might be wrong, but we might judge him like that. Other types of stereotypes. Yes, and this is one of the things I don't like about this article, because it says that prejudice is an extreme stereotype, and that doesn't really tell us anything. So forget about that for a moment. If you said that for prejudice, get rid of that, because that doesn't tell us anything. But let's talk about what prejudice is. Not an extreme stereotype, but what is it?
It's like an opinion, like without a fact to support.
Oh.
Without experience or that stuff, it's just a thinking with opinion, usually negative opinion.
Yeah, so an opinion about something you might not have personal experience with, it's usually negative. Haneen says, and I think this might have been, Haneen, I think this might have been for stereotypes, an idea that is used to describe a particular person or thing, or a person or thing thought to represent such an idea. So that's, I think that's probably more stereotype. What else can we say about prejudice? That's good, Haneen. Yep, it definitely is. But what else can we say about prejudice?
Liking or disliking.
Yeah, it's the liking or disliking. And so the way I kind of like to separate these things out so that they make some sort of sense, even though stereotypes and prejudices there can be a bit of gray area between them. Let's talk about dogs, okay? So who here likes dogs? Okay, who here does not like dogs? Nobody? Sam? Okay, a couple people don't like dogs. Okay, that's cool. That's cool. What are some of our stereotypes about dogs?
They're dirty.
They're dirty. They're pets, or they like to be petted sometimes. What are our other stereotypes about dogs? What do we know about dogs? What do they like? They like to eat what? Oh yeah, they like to chew on bones. Yeah, they do. What else do they like?
And I walk here.
What's that?
And I walk here.
Yeah, they like to walk or go out for runs, or you have to walk them. What? They're brave? Oh, they like to play. Yeah, dogs like to play. What? You have to walk them.
They bark a lot.
They bark a lot. They're annoying. Oh, yeah, sometimes they can be used to protect your house. So we have a lot of stereotypes about dogs, right? And so the stereotypes that you hold to be true about dogs will kind of lead into your prejudicial ideas, right? So my stereotypes about dogs are that they're happy, they're playful, they're loyal, and they love people so much, and they're fun, right? And so you can see I have some ideas about what dogs are like. Many of those ideas are based on my personal experiences, but they're also social ideas that are circulating as well. So my prejudice towards dogs is that I like them, right? I like dogs. I think they're fun. I think they're cool. I like playing with dogs and wrestling with them and playing tug of war with them. I like them, right? So the stereotype might be that dogs are happy, playful creatures, right? And so my prejudice toward them is positive, right? I like them. However, there are some negative stereotypes circulating about dogs as well, right? They're dirty, they're annoying, they bark all the time, you have to walk them. Some of you might have had negative experiences with dogs, right? That might have frightened you, or they may have bit you. And so you might have some negative stereotypes about dogs, and so you might have a negative prejudice about them. You might dislike them. You'll be like, ugh, dogs, not a fan, right? So the stereotype are kind of the ideas that you have about a certain group based on what you, or a certain individual based on what you see with your eyes. And that allows you to tell something about them, right? So if I don't have a picture of a dog handy, but if I put a picture of a dog up there, I might look at that dog and I might say, oh, I bet that dog is happy and playful and loving and likes to wrestle and run around, okay? And again, I might have a positive prejudice. I might say, yeah, I like that dog because I have ideas about what dogs are like. But another person might look at that dog and say, oh, yeah, I have stereotypes about dogs that they're dirty and barky and annoying, and sometimes they bite. And I don't like that. So I don't like that dog, right? Either way, do we really know anything about the dog? No. We're applying, we see the dog on the screen. We activate our stereotypes. What do we know about all dogs, quote unquote? And then we kind of make a prejudicial judgment. Oh yeah, cool dog. He looks like a fun dog, or she looks like a fun dog. Or, ooh, dogs, keep them away, right? So that's kind of the distinction I like to make between stereotype and prejudice. So stereotype are kind of the ideas that we have around something. So when we see a dog, what kind of ideas come to mind about what dogs are like? And then we have kind of a feeling, right? We make a value judgment about dogs, either yes, please, dogs, or no, thank you, no dogs, right? So that's the prejudice part. And interesting, I don't have a question on that. And then where we get to discrimination, discrimination is where you act on your prejudice, right? So, my friend might say, hey, I'm gonna come over on Saturday, can I bring my dog, right? And so if I have a positive prejudice towards dogs, if I like dogs, I'm gonna positively discriminate. I'm gonna say, yes, actually, you can only come over if you bring your dog, right? So I'm positively discriminating against the dog. I'm saying, yes, bring the dog, don't come without the dog. I want the dog. However, if I have negative stereotypes towards the dog and a negative prejudice, I don't like them, my friend might say, hey, I'm coming over on Saturday, can I bring my dog? No, don't bring the dog. In fact, if you come over with the dog, I'm not answering the door. So I am negatively discriminating against the dog because I have this negative prejudice based on the ideas that I have about dogs, right? And so, with dogs, you're allowed to do this, right? You can have dog prejudice. It's not a bad thing. With people, it's a little bit different, but I think it's a good example, right? So stereotypes are the things that we think we know about the dog just based on looking at it. The prejudice is kind of the judgment or the feeling we have, either yes dogs or no dogs. And then when we discriminate, that's when we act, right? So when my friend says, hey, I'm coming over, I can positively discriminate and say, yes, bring the dog by all means. Don't come over without the dog. Or I can negatively discriminate and say, don't bring the dog. If you bring the dog, I'm not even answering the door. Forget it. Does that make sense? Okay. Ooh boy. Okay, we may have to bring this up a little bit tomorrow too, but let's talk about this experiment by Aronson and Osherow in Jane Elliott's class. This is so interesting. You can't do this study anymore. It's not ethical. But in like the 60s, you could totally do this. Was it 60s or 70s, did they say? 70s? Yeah, you can't do an experiment like this anymore. You can't mess with kids' heads this way. But what happened in this experiment?
Because Jane Elliott claimed that the brown-eyed kids are smarter than the blue-eyed kid. The blue-eyed kids think that like they are incompetent and not as capable as the brown-eyed kids.
Right.
Therefore, they think they perform poorly and not as good as they're supposed to be.
Right, so this is very interesting. So what did Jane Elliott do, the teacher, with these poor little kids? She created a couple of stereotypes, right? She said that kids with brown eyes are smarter and better behaved, and kids with blue eyes are not as smart, and they're, you know how blue-eyed kids are, they're always misbehaving, right? She created this stereotype, right? And so what happened? I'm just going to throw these up on the screen. This has to do with the dogs, but obviously that's a stereotype, right? And so someone would probably have a positive prejudice about dogs if they like to cuddle and they love their partner or their person, right? So positive stereotypes about dogs. Right. So Jane Elliott, the teacher, creates these two stereotypes and circulates them into class. And so what happens again, King? What's the result of this?
The blue-eyed kids perform poorly.
Blue-eyed kids perform poorly, and the brown-eyed kids?
Good.
Yeah. Brown-eyed kids start to perform better. They start to behave more. They start to get higher test scores. And the blue-eyed kids start to misbehave, and they start to get lower test scores. And how do the kids interact? What happens when they interact? Yeah. Yeah, the brown-eyed kids start looking down on the kids with blue eyes. So this is really, really interesting. Let me ask you something. Is there any, I know you probably haven't read all the science on this, but I think you probably know the answer anyway. What is the correlation between intelligence and eye color?
0.
0, right? You can't tell anything about someone's intelligence by their eye color. There's no correlation between that, luckily, because I think everyone in here has brown eyes, except me. Oh no, Aliana, you have blue eyes. Almost everyone here has brown eyes except for Aliana and I, who are in the minority. You can't tell anything about someone's intelligence or their behavior, huh? Kind of. They're hard to tell. They're not brown. They're non-brown eyes is what they are. What color do they look to you? Yeah, I know. They're kind of a weird color. They're kind of grayish, bluish, greenish. Depends on the light. It's weird. So you can't tell the difference, right? You cannot tell anything about someone's behavior or someone's intelligence by their eye color. And yet, if you looked at the test scores from this particular class, something seems to be going on, right? The blue-eyed kids are starting to do worse. The brown-eyed kids are starting to do better. So what's going on? What does this tell us about prejudice?
That people can easily get influenced by behavior of the others.
Yeah, people can be influenced by these stereotypes, right? So the brown-eyed kids, of course, are influenced because they start to look down on the blue-eyed kids. And of course, why wouldn't they? Those blue-eyed kids, you know, they're a bunch of dummies, right? So they start to look down, but they actually start to act out the stereotype, right? The brown-eyed kids actually start to perform better on the exams, and the blue-eyed kids start to perform worse. What is going on here? What is going on? Magic? Yeah, they definitely believed what Jane Elliott told them. They believed what their teacher told them. They internalized those social messages, and then they started to act them out, right? And so this is kind of what I was talking about with Katie in the high school, is that sometimes people absorb social messages and they act on them, even when it's not in their best interest. So is it in the best interest of blue-eyed kids to believe this stereotype? No, definitely not. But they're kids and they don't really know any better. So they do believe it and they start to act it out, right? So prejudices can have a way of becoming real, right? And so again, there is no correlation between eye color and intelligence, none at all. But if you look at the data, it seems to suggest that. So are we seeing, in this class, are we seeing biological reality, or are we seeing the results of social messaging and socially constructed knowledge? Yeah, this is the result of socially constructed knowledge, not biology, right? But if you didn't know any better, you might look at the test scores in Jane Elliott's grade book and you might say, yeah, the brown-eyed kids are smarter. Look, the data's right here, right? But again, there's more going on than just biology, right? Humans are social animals. Social ideas have power. Things that we all believe have power. And so in this class, where everyone believes that brown-eyed kids are smarter, that becomes the reality, even though biologically speaking, it's not true. There's nothing to it, right? But the prejudice has power, right? If people believe it, sometimes it has a way of appearing to come true. Okay, last question I'm going to ask you. Why do stereotypes remain so stable over time, would you say? Because they do. You know, the stereotype about Jewish people kind of like loving money and being, Yeah, being smart and having, lots of money and being good with money, that kind of stereotype. That stereotype is centuries old. It is hundreds of years old, and it is still around, right? It is difficult to shake it, right? It's difficult to get rid of it. And so stereotypes can remain incredibly stable through time. Why is that, do you think?
Because some of it is true. Like, for example, like the Jew thing, like if you see most Jewish families or like in the world or like in America, just like, for example, like they're quite wealthy and they have a really like close knit to each other, and that's kind of like what they're known.
Right. So sometimes there is an element of truth to them, right? Sometimes we see these prejudices kind of manifested. We see them over and over again, and so we say, oh, they must be true. Why else are they stable? Say that one more time.
People recall facts better when the facts support the stereotype.
Yeah, people recall things better when they support the stereotype. Or, if I can just change that a little bit and make it more general, people remember things when they are in alignment with what they already believe. Okay? Do you know what this is called? It's got a fancy term. Know what this is called? This is called, and this is a critical thinking thing, this is called confirmation bias. And this is just an artifact of how human brains work. And so we are all susceptible to this. We are all sort of vulnerable to this. We much more easily remember and search for and identify things that confirm what we already believe. And things that don't, we tend to ignore or forget about or whatever, right? So when I think about my dog prejudice, right, and I think about dogs, instantly what comes to mind for me are all of the lovely dogs I've met, right? Have I met a few annoying dogs? Yes. Have I met a few aggressive dogs? I've seen some aggressive dogs. But because I have this prejudice of I love dogs, immediately when I think of dogs, all of the good dogs pop into my mind, right? I think of all the good dogs, and I don't really think about all of the dogs that have been annoying or aggressive or dirty or whatever. But if I have a negative prejudice against dogs, if I don't like them, when I think of dogs, what's going to come to mind? Yeah, all the scary dogs, the aggressive dogs, the annoying dogs, the dirty dogs, or the dogs with fleas or rabies or whatever. Those are the ones that are going to come forward in my mind. And when I'm out walking around, I'm going to be much more likely to notice the dogs that conform to my stereotype. It's much easier for me to recall the dogs that align with what I believe about dogs. Okay? And that applies to anything. So humans are kind of vulnerable to confirmation bias, and this has to do with dogs or food or politics or whatever. It's much more easy to recall and identify things that confirm what you already believe. It's much more difficult to pay attention to things that are in conflict with it. And again, this is a danger for people trying to think critically, right? Because we want to look at all the facts, but our brains are predisposed to focus on the things that we already believe. Right? So in some ways, our brain is kind of working against us, right? It's trying to keep us from thinking critically and trying to keep us believing what we already believe, right? So prejudice is like that, right? Prejudice is hard to shake because if you believe a certain thing, and even if you don't believe it, even if it's a social message that you've absorbed and it's kind of floating around under the surface, you still notice, right? So the idea of Jewish people being wealthy or being good with money or something like that, every time, if you've absorbed that social message, which we probably all have, every time you see a Jewish person who seems to have money, you're like, oh, there we go. Rich Jewish person, there we go, right? And you notice it and you remember it. if you happen to encounter a Jewish person who doesn't have a lot of money, it doesn't it doesn't ring a bell, it doesn't press that button, it doesn't check the box. And so you kind of just ignore it and forget about it. And so then when you think of the stereotype, you remember all of those Jewish people you met that seemed to have lots of money, and you can't seem to remember the ones that didn't. And so it confirms the stereotype, right? Is the stereotype true? Hard to say, right? It's tough because, again, our brain is working against us, trying to keep us believing what we already believe, right? Which is, again, if you're trying to think critically, is a pain in the butt because your brain is not helping you, right? But again, human brains are weird little biological tools, and they're not perfect. Whew, okay. I think that's enough for today. People in here, just 1 minute. People online, I'm going to sign you off right now. Good work today. Good work in the live chat. I will see you tomorrow.